So I'm very happy to introduce Yiru Lai, who is a PhD candidate in the Second Language Education Program in CEHD, and her research interests include language socialization of multilingual international students into academic discourse communities. And that's what she's going to be talking about today. So the title of her talk is Constructing Academic Voices in Language Socialization in Academic Contexts. So please welcome Yiru.
So thank you very much for your introduction, Dr. Pasani, and thank you all for your interest in my study examining the construction of academic voices in higher education context. So my research interest in language socialization among multilingual international students originated during my pursuit of a graduate degree in the United States. I always remember my first presentation in graduate school. I experienced challenges using linguistic forms and nonverbal expressions appropriately to communicate my attitudes and critiques in relation to what I knew about studies. I began to wonder, were my challenges a result of my language proficiency or a lack of social cultural competence in the target language? So what I usually feel is I am an invisible stranger in a specific cultural group. Issues of language proficiency, knowledge of discipline-specific vocabulary and grammar, and the relevant social cultural practices in academic context are considered as major challenges experienced by some multilingual international students. Those issues may lead to miscommunication on U.S. campuses between international students and their U.S. university professors, colleagues, and the students. So those miscommunication phenomenon become more and more common because, according to the Institution of International Education, in the academic year of 2015 and 2016, there are more than 1 million international students enrolled in U.S. higher education. And then the number of enrollment continues to increase, except for the intensive English language program. But that can be another discussion. So the majority of current published research on these issues has focused on the students' learning experiences and outcome through a quantitative analysis lens. However, a more thorough theoretical inquiry and ethnographic analysis is required to reveal the process of students' learning of the target language knowledge and also the associated social cultural competence and values. And one such theory and approach is language socialization. So language socialization research investigates how processes of linguistic and cultural development take place in and through the use of language in interaction. This line of research also explores how larger social structures and the social political ideologies referenced through the use of language shape socialization processes and practices at local level or a larger level. However, language socialization has rarely documented unexpected developmental trajectories and outcome or bad subjects, participants who do not recognize and respond in socially sanctioned ways. So critical to competent participation in academic context is the ability to understand how diverse linguistic forms and semiotic resources are used to require discipline-specific knowledge to display epistemic stances in a culturally appropriate manner, and then also to construct academic identities and engage in discipline-relevant academic activities. The development of academic voices as competent members in academic discourse communities is not a neutral process, but a collaborative and dynamic socialization practices in that both less and more experienced participants are active contributors to meaning construction and interaction outcomes. So the construction of academic voices involves language socialization into academic discourse practices, specifically to a discipline field. Academic discourse or academic language refers to the forms of, or the different forms of oral and the written academic, oral and written language and communication, such as speech genres, registers, linguistic structures, interactional patterns. So those are legitimized by a specific discourse community. Academic discourse, or the construction of academic voices, can be a site of struggle because those diverse forms of linguistic and communication are not neutral language and semiotic resources, but rather as situated utterances or speech genres in which speakers know how to use multiple voices at different levels for different social purposes and in different social settings, especially in dialogue with others. So co-construct or co-create or co-construct meanings. So for example, for language and social justice, dialogue with the audiences, receiving their feedback, responding their questions, or even in happy hour after presentations, right? Like know how to have a casual conversation, but still have some kind of formal presentation of their expertise. However, the development of academic voices and membership as competent scholars in higher education context has not been examined fully enough, in particularly from a linguistic and topological perspective. In addition, constructing and delivering academic voices is never just a matter of words. Words are accompanied with hand gestures, eye contact, and gaze, body languages, pauses, and use of silence in conversation, and all of which can be creatively realized among interaction. So this study fills these gaps in the literature by examining the socialization processes of constructing and negotiating academic voices among English as an additional language, multilingual international students in academic context. Specifically looking at socialization activities and practices addressing why students do this in this way, and how students negotiate and redefine certain linguistic forms and nonverbal expressions and structures to better present themselves as a competent presenters, and also the members in their own discipline-specific field. So to address these two questions, ethnographic and critical discourse analytical approaches were used to examine how language-mediated interaction, taken collectively, not as isolated instances, facilitate and shape the interrelated processes of academic voice development in higher education context. This method were also used to uncover the interaction between micro-level socialization practices and the macro-level institutional and social political structures. In addition, these two approaches are sensitive to the power researchers' relationships between my study participant and I as a researcher, encouraging reflexivity towards my own positionalities as a language learner, speaker of English, a graduate student who took this class where I was conducting my research for credit, and also a student researcher in academia. So this study was conducted in a graduate level research presentation class at US Midwestern University. This course was optional for graduate students at that university, given that it was designed for students to develop both linguistic and the social cultural competence required for academic presentations. This graduate level class was an ideal site to explore the development and negotiation of academic discourse, academic voices in language socialization in higher education context. So data sources were collected during a 6-month period in 2013 spring semester. Data consist of a field-based collection of data, including classroom observation field notes of 15 lessons, 3 open-ended interviews with faculty and each focal student participant throughout the semester, and the collection of the relevant documents and artifacts. And also the digital recordings of naturally occurring classroom interactions that capture the acquisition of discipline-specific knowledge and values that are explicitly defined and implicitly indexed through the use of language. Okay, so about my study participant. The course instructor, Professor Mary, pseudonyms, is a bilingual speaker whose first language is English and who has been learning Spanish as an additional language throughout her life. She received her master's degree in second language education and has been teaching and working with multilingual international students for decades at this Midwestern university. 4 female PhD students participated in my study. Hannah, Hannah, June, Yvonne, and Lynn. So 3 of my study student participants, Hannah, Lynn, and Yvonne, speak Mandarin Chinese as their primary language, while June speaks Thai as her first language. Before pursuing their PhD studies, all of my student participants received master's degrees in their home countries or in an English-speaking country. Excuse me. So for example, Lynn got her master from United Kingdom, whereas Yvonne got her master from a US university on East Coast. Prior to this class, none of my student participants had taken any graduate level courses specifically for research presentation. In order to examine the characteristics features of discourse practices during language-mediated activities, I use Van Leeuwen's legitimation, particularly authorization, moral evaluation, and rationalization to uncover the spoken and unspoken why and how questions, which are why students need to do this in this way, and how students negotiate and redefine certain lexical expressions and grammatical structures to better present or match their presentation styles. According to Van Leeuwen, authorization refers to legitimation by reference to the authority of tradition, custom, laws, and institutions. Moral evaluation is legitimation by reference to value systems, and rationalizations means legitimation by reference to the goals and the uses of institutionalized use social action, and then to the knowledge that society has constructed to endow them with cognitive validity. In the following section, I discuss excerpts of classroom language-mediated activities that socialized students into the genres of academic presentation and features of academic presenter. I also present excerpts of researcher-researched interviews in which the student participants fully explain their negotiation and redefinitions of certain linguistic forms and nonverbal communications to be used in their academic presentations. According to the language socialization perspectives, academic voices can be articulated and achieved dialogically through overt communication means. So for example, language, gesture, and other symbolic forms. While verbal resources were more easily learned, nonverbal communication skills such as making and maintaining an eye contact with audience were more challenging to some students, especially to those who came from a culture that demonstrates different values towards academic presentations. When her students struggle with certain nonverbal communication practices, the course instructor, Mary, explained the unspoken ideologies underlying certain communication practices. So we are going to just listen and watch to this less than a minute classroom practices excerpt.
Look side to What's the interpretation that you know of? If I am looking, you ask me a question and I look down. I don't know. Either not interested, there's something more serious though. Disrespectful. Not confident. If I look down, I think that's wrong. That's really serious. Because you don't want to get the impression that you're lying, right? But if you grew up in a culture where respect is shown by looking down, what a contrast, truly, what a contrast.
Okay, so now let's look at some analysis here. How about around 30 seconds to read the transcription here? Okay, so in excerpt 1, by drawing upon their existing knowledge and prior experiences, the course instructor Mary asked her students for their interpretation of making eye contact with audience in presentation. So in line 6, students choose not interested can be seen as a trouble source to the instructor's question at prior turn. Similarly, further instructional assistance is required from the course instructor or other relative more experienced classmate. In line 7, Mary expands her question asked at the prior term by saying there are some things more serious, functioning as a repair initiator to direct the class to better answer her questions. However, the two following responses are not accurate until student 4, in line 12, utter the words lying with a quiet voice and rising tone in line 12. Other students are laughing, as you can see here, ha ha. Ha ha. Probably because they're really thinking lying can be a response to the cultural norms of making and maintaining eye contact with interlocutors in conversation. Actually, I was laughing too, because this is new to me. So in excerpt 1, the importance of making and maintaining the eye contact with audience in presentation is legitimized by reference to the moral value systems in the student's target language. If an individual looks down in conversation, others may misunderstand he or she is lying. As the instructor says here, from line 17 to 21. So the unspoken values underlying this eye contact nonverbal expression is legitimized through the initiation, response, evaluation, the IRE sequences in conversation, in which the course instructor initiates questions to encourage students to draw on their prior knowledge, evaluate students' contribution to the course knowledge, and to contrast value systems between students' primary and target cultures. Although some linguistic forms and nonverbal resources acquired in the socialization process were challenging against to their primary cultural practices, students were active agents in negotiating and redefining those expressions to construct their academic voices as competent scholars recognized by their own discipline-specific communities. In our second interview, Hannah noted that she now felt more comfortable to make an eye contact with audience in presentation rather than read her presenter notes most of the time. That's what I'm doing now. Hannah also stressed how shocked she was when she learned the unspoken ideologies about the inappropriate behavior of looking down in presentation. Here in from lines 9 and 10. Yes, so I feel now I was shocked. In excerpt 3, from lines 9 to 13, Hannah further explains her concerns about not making and maintaining eye contact in presentation. She does not want to give a negative impressions to other less or more experienced members in her discipline who attend her presentations. So for example, her excuse me, professors, colleagues, or classmates in her department. However, Hannah still struggles with the unspoken ideologies about eye contact in presentation. Instead of looking at interlocutors' eyes, she socialized herself to look at their ears to better demonstrate her voices as an academic and sincere presenter. Okay. So Hannah exercised her agency to negotiate and rationalize certain presentation styles and speech genres learned from this class to better construct her voices as a competent members in her discipline. Academic voices can also be constructed when students position themselves and are positioned by others as relative less or more experienced member in and through discourse. These positional identities are mediated by students' discipline-specific knowledge that is indexed through the epistemic markers students take in conversation. And so some epistemic markers can be phonological, morphological, and syntactic structures that index academic standpoint. In this class, a number of language socialization activities that socialize students into how some linguistic forms and nonverbal features, so for example, intonations of English language can be used to more effectively acknowledge and respond to audience questions in presentation. In the next example, the course instructor Mary raised students' awareness to decipher different messages conveyed in conversation with different intonation. So that's here the aspects of this classroom discourse practices.
Graduate classes, how does the professor respond? It's not always good question, good question, good question, good question. What are some other responses that they can have that you've heard? Interesting question. So is that a good thing or not a good thing? What, you're on the right track. It depends on what?
In some cases, it's good question if the teacher always agrees. But sometimes, like, if the student's answer is small or a little bit small, then he says,
Okay, so how do you know the difference between interesting, good, and interesting, There's something that we can tell the difference. The intonation, right?
Okay. So for native speakers, intonation may be something that's socialized through when they were younger. However, intonation is still challenging for many of my study participants in this class. So let's spend around 30 seconds to read this transcript. Yes. Okay, so now look at my analysis here. In Asset 4, in line 10, okay, so course instructor Mary asked the student 1 how to tell different social meanings of the phrase interesting question with different intonations. Seeing as an extended repair initiator, Mary's phrase depends on what signals further explanation are required from student 1 who responds at the prior turn. But it seems that student 1 and the rest of the class failed to fully answer Mary's questions. Depends on what questions. In line 16 and 17, Mary expands her question by asking students how they may know of the differences between the words interesting, good, uttered with a rising pitch, and also interesting, with a lower pitch. In line 21st, student 2 respond to Mary by altering the word intonation with a soft voice and a rising intonation, implying that the student still struggling with how to decipher different messages conveyed by the word interesting with different intonation. In Aspect 4, the linguistic and nonverbal features of the forms of acknowledgement in presentation are legitimized by reference to not only the authority of student discipline-specific knowledge and how the forms of acknowledgement are voiced by professors, so the professors in students' department and also other more experienced members in student discipline-specific discourse communities, but also the social meanings of those forms with different intonations in the student's target culture. So through manifestations of epistemic stances, students in language socialization activities construct and negotiate their voices as a relative less or more experienced member in a particular discourse community. For example, in this graduate level class, students participate in acting their agency to define some forms of acknowledgement as a response to the questions that were irrelevant to their research presentations. So I had this interview with Yvonne, another study participant, with her right after her Q question and answer practice in class. During our interview, Yvonne explains her ways of using different linguistic phrases as an acknowledgement in her presentation. In this excerpt, from lines 10 to 12, Yvonne indicates that the phrase, "This is an interesting question," is used when she identifies a question is irrelevant to her study presentation or research area. By contrast, from lines 16 to 20, another phrase, "This is a challenging question," is used when a question is categorized as challenging, which asks about her study limitations or that connect more closely to her discipline knowledge. Another participant, Lynn, reported that a challenging question is not necessarily related to her research presentation, but needed to be relevant to her general foundational knowledge in her discipline. In this excerpt, in excerpt 6, so that's been around 30 seconds to read the transcript here. Good. Okay. So in excerpt 6, from lines 4 to 9, so from line notes 4 to 9, Lynn explained her use of different sentences structures, such as "I don't quite know the answer to your question, but based on what I know about." So Lynn may not know the answers to all the questions received in presentation, but she still tries to provide audience some general ideas to demonstrate her foundational knowledge in her discipline, and also to direct the presentation focus back to her expertise. From lines 15 to 19, those sentence structures are learned through the socialization interactions with her advisor in her program, or the course instructor, Mary. So after she knows how to better address different types of questions received from audience, even for those are not closely related to her research interest, Lynn does not feel lost or embarrassed as she was in presentation, as she said here. So I think in doing this, I wouldn't be lost in presentation or feel embarrassed. In Ling's language socialization process and practice, the sentence structure, I don't quite know the answer to this question, but based on what I know about, I would like to, can be used as an epistemic downgrader, functioning as an independent advice-seeking initiation, while simultaneously displaying Ling's self-awareness of potential challenges in presentation. Okay, so what the analysis tell us about, and also how they respond to my research questions. Okay, so the unspoken values underlying certain linguistic forms and nonverbal expressions are addressed or legitimized through the initiation response evaluation, the IRE sequences in classroom discourse practices, in which the course instructor initiate questions to encourage students to get and also to involve them into the classroom activities. Also evaluate students' contribution to the course knowledge, and also contrast moral value systems between students first and then the target culture systems. In the classroom language socialization activities, where students were positioned as knowledge receivers, these IRE exchanges established epistemic boundaries whereby students' agency to contribute to the construction of knowledge was constrained by the instructor's linguistic and cultural authority. These epistemic boundaries also shaped how students construct their voices as academic and competent members, which was influenced by and reflected the broader ideologies associated with presentation genres in the students' target culture. And then the second question about how. So students' expertise in their own disciplines play a crucial role in constructing and negotiating their voices as legitimate academic members by projecting their knowledge on the choices of different forms of acknowledgement or the different linguistic form nonverbal communication to present who they are as a proficient researcher or presenter. Excuse me. And so those references, by referencing to the knowledge of their professional community, also those references are constructed to endowed with cognitive validity. Students also exercise their agency to negotiate or rationalize certain presentation styles and speech genres learned from this class to better construct their academic voices. The agentive roles of students in developing academic voices and negotiating legitimized ideologies relevant to presentation genres is crucial in the formation of linguistic habits and the transformation of heart and mind, representing complex and recursive trajectory of language socialization. In the process of becoming aware of greater normative, communicative competence and social cultural values in the target discourse community, multilingual international students continue to construct and negotiate their academic voices and agentive positions as legitimate members with the linguistic forms and associated social cultural ideologies valued in U.S. institutions of higher education. The development of students' own voices and identities as competent and academic scholars in professional disciplines is dynamic and multidimensional, and influenced not only by linguistic ideologies, participant framework, transnational experiences, and the discipline-specific discourse itself, but also students' expertise in their own disciplines. So that's about the theorizing language socialization. Okay. And how about the research in language socialization? Critical discourse analysis approach discerns the role of language in the production and reproduction of discourse practices and negotiation of discipline-specific ideologies and membership. The close discourse analysis of classroom language socialization activities suggests that multilingual international students may not be able to approximate target-like conversation patterns until they solved or resolved major problems of language knowledge. In this regard, encouraging interaction within classrooms does not necessarily imply that the interaction will have entirely target-like qualities. Students may continue to reproduce or produce interlanguaging or cross-cultural interaction patterns until the major problems of language knowledge are overcome. Thank you very much for your interest in my presentation. So now I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
I have a question about, I realize you just showed us a short excerpt of the interaction between the teacher and the students with respect to eye contact. I was really struck by the interpretation of looking down as lying. And I wondered if the teacher unpacked these kinds of concepts a little bit more for the students so that they could get a more nuanced understanding of these kinds of body language signals or other kinds of socialization concepts that came up in the class, because that to me seemed like not enough to say about looking down. And I see some of the native speakers of English shaking their heads about that. And so I just wondered how much more was going on.
Yeah, so looking down is one of the major ideologies that the course instructors socialize students into know how the cultural or messages underlying this nonverbal communication. So that's one. And then in other socialization activities, so she demonstrated this. So for example, looking down can be impolite in interview. Yeah, so interviewee and interviewer's relationship. That's the, I think there, yeah, so in addition to that, and also this one, there, I think these are two ideologies that she share and demonstrate and explain to the students.
Maybe this is what you're asking, but it kind of makes you, you're right, using these are like ideologies of communication, but where is she basing them on empirical data, or is she kind of her own intuition, or just these kind of stereotypes, or like?
She didn't explain like where the data came from, probably her knowledge as a native speaker.
Yeah, because these are complex, I mean, it's a complex concept, right? And the follow-up interview that you had with one of the participants suggested that she took that at face value and didn't really have any understanding of the nuance, that the potential nuance of looking down. And so there may also be some impact of instruction or the way that the instructor presents or unpacks or doesn't unpack concepts on the way that your participants are being socialized into these ideologies, right?
I agree, and that's a good point, because, so for example, when I learned this by looking down means that you are lying, that wasn't new to me, but I also wonder, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
Well, that is something that was missing in my culture. So sometimes I feel quite uncomfortable if I presented my studies just reading from my presenter notes rather than looking around my audience.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because then if you extend that and say, okay, legitimation in what context, right? So it's legitimation within the context of this particular instructor who says lying means looking down, but then when you leave that context, then there might not be agency or legitimation, but it's also agency.
Yeah, I agree. And also that reflects how challenging can be teaching cultures, right?
Yeah.
And so one thing usually in EFO or ESO classroom context is just simplified. This is the culture. Rather than this is one of the multiple cultures or language practices that either the multilingual native or native speakers may have. Yes.
Did you theorize her repetition of the answers? I noticed that she did that a lot. She would just say the same thing that they had said.
Yeah.
Did you theorize that in any way? Was that just to make sure everybody heard, or did you read something deeper into it?
You mean the repetition of?
In the classroom clips, I just noticed the teacher did that. Was that a lot?
I did notice that there are repetitive socialization activities occurred almost every week, but I did not calculate how many times. But that could be the direction I can go. Socialization of repetitive for like frequencies. Yes.
I kept wondering if speaking the unspoken is the best way, to socialize somebody. And I was wondering about, who nominated these topics, because they do seem kind of stereotypical, or,
Yeah.
Whereas I'm just wondering if the students brought some of their, like things that they're wondering about, if that could be maybe a better source, or, and I sort of am equating it to like teaching metalinguistic, knowledge, and like asking students to apply it somewhere,
Yeah.
It's like somehow, this explicit knowledge will help them with all of these like intensely nuanced interactions in their disciplines.
Okay. That's a good question. Okay, so first,
Interesting.
interesting. Definitely not interesting.
I'm glad I'm the good question partner.
I will give you a chocolate. I think, so what we learned here from this class is what they call a general presentation genres and communication skills applied to, I think, professional fields, but not necessary to student disciplines, specific community. So for example, in some classroom activities, so students from engineering or from business ask, how is there any other forms, linguistically or culturally appropriate manners I can have in my own discourse community? However, the course instructor always reference them to talk to their academic advisors. So I have another question. So how do people generate this foundational ideological forms for presenting in academic or professional settings?
And how aware are they? Like, what advisor is going to be able to speak the unspoken?
Yeah, well, actually, that's another interesting question, because I do have, I think Lynn. So Lynn is very active participant in her lab and also her program. She asked her advisor, academic professors and colleagues how to better improve her presentation. The interesting responses from her professor and colleagues that you just do whatever you want to do. Yeah. Yeah, and also she actually socialized some of her colleagues, Americans, that how to do a more, not accurate, but a more organized presentation.
So that's an interesting example of how socialization works both ways, right?
Yeah, so multi-directional, yes. Yeah, but I just didn't have the data here, but in another manuscript. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I was wondering if you could go to one of your discussion slides where you talk
Yeah.
about agency.
Here.
I think I just didn't quite catch what you were saying here. Were you saying that agency is one of the findings, or can you maybe relate agency to Van Leeuwen and legitimation? Is that what?
Yeah. So okay. So that's also a good question. So agency connects to rationalization. So in this class, the socialization activities that came from the instructor are always or usually authorized.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the valued linguistic forms and nonverbal communication that students need to follow. However, students exercise their agency
to rationalize.
Yeah.
So centrifugal, pronunciation.
Okay,
The two C's in Baptiste. Yeah.
okay.
So that's how I see their demonstration actness of agency, like tied closely to Banua's rationalization.
Yeah, so I like that you did that because I think, because of the different kinds of legitimation, it
Yeah.
seems like the authorization, there's no room for agency, but then, and moral evaluation too, there is room for agency. But I was thinking about your first research question and the modal that you used, which was like, I think in the need to, or I think in the earlier version you had should do, and that was a surprise for me because I think Van Leeuwen usually says, why do this in this way? And the should really changes it, which is great for a language socialization study. And so I was wondering if you were looking at what they should do or what they actually do. And so I really appreciate agency in there as like a way of negotiating those two very different, potentially different
Thank you.
actions. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback. And thank you for too.
Yes, I'm just curious if you shared any of this with the teacher or what the follow-up has been.
But I did share some findings with my study participants because many of them are not only monolingual international. Yeah, so language speakers of English, but also, but they were also hired as international teaching assistants, so teaching undergraduate level or graduate level classes. And so, according to some of them, they did presentation almost every week to their students. And so, I asked them how did they do in their presentation, in their own classes, or their lab discussion meetings. Some of them shared with me that they define certain forms and expressions in order to sort of like present and also reflect their multilingual, multicultural experiences and competencies, rather than just assimilate into one American language. And I think it's important and critical to language educators that how can we create a more meaningful environment for us, or also for our students with international and multilingual backgrounds, to help them to become more aware of the language resources and the cultural competence that they have are so valued in this society and global world. Any other questions?
Yeah.